That was really strong coffee. Okay. Afternoon coffee, cookbook corner. That's where it's at. Hey guys, it's another Cookbook Corner with Chef Andrea, and I'm so excited to have you here today. Cookbook Corner. Okay. I'm excited about this cookbook because we're talking one of my favorite food groups on the planet Earth, which is cookies. And let me tell you a little bit about what's happening here in Florida today. And then we'll talk about cookies, and then we'll talk about this amazing cookie cookbook. So today is Monday, September 20th, and Monday is my day off. My Monday is most people's Sunday. I typically work Tuesday through Saturday. So Monday's my day off. So one, I'm not in a chef's jacket today. But there's another reason I'm not in a chef's jacket today, because it is September 20th. It's technically fall, isn't it? I think where you live, it might be fall. And for those very fortunate people who live someplace where there's such thing called seasons, it might actually be cool where you are today. Today is Monday, September 20th, and I walked out of the house at about 7:30 this morning, and it was at that moment 84 degrees and 85% humidity. It was like walking out into blood temperature soup. It was not crisp, and it was not fall, and it was not lovely. So I declared it fake fall. I declare fake fall somewhere in this week every year, somewhere between September 20th and 25th. I say that's it. I don't really care what Florida's doing. I am declaring it fall, and I begin the fall shenanigans. So I will pull out ankle boots and sweaters and light everything pumpkin spice. My coffee is now sweetened with pumpkin spice almond milk. I will start fall baking. The candles in the house all turn into cinnamon and pumpkin pie spice candles. It's happening. It's fake fall. I've declared it. So I'm wearing a fall sweater. But also, side note, I made this sweater. I'm a knitter in my free time, and I knit this sweater for fake fall. It's wool, but it's superwash wool, so it's lost some of its wooliness. And it's short sleeve, so it's a Florida fake fall sweater. So there's that. Fake fall is here. Let's make fall cookies. Let's talk about my favorite cookie cookbook in the history of cookie cookbooks. I can't even begin to imagine how many baking and pastry cookbooks I have. Maybe I'll do a count for you guys one time. I've mentioned I have about 400 cookbooks in this collection. Of them, how many are devoted specifically to baking and pastry? Quite a few. But this particular one, this is my favorite for cookies. I'm just going to say that. Okay. Great Cookies by Carole Walter. So look how we're so coordinated. Carole's cover is declaring it fake fall also. Great Cookies by Carole Walter. I'm going to tell you, and it says Secrets to Sensational Sweets. She won a James Beard Award for this cookbook. And how delicious does that look? Pecan sandies. I almost made those today, but you know what? We had a pecan sticky bun class here 2 days ago, and we used literally every pecan in the entire space. We went through cups and cups of pecans, but the sticky buns were so good. That's what we're talking about. Great cookies. So this cookbook, I bought pretty close to when it came out. Maybe I bought it when it came out. I bet I did. 2003. I bet that's when I bought it. Because I was going to say that I bought it when we moved into our house, and that's pretty darn close, maybe the year before. I bought it for my mom. So my mom at the time had retired and was on a cookie quest, and one of the things that she was messing around with were ginger snaps. her partner Steve was looking for this ginger molasses cookie of his youth that he was having a really hard time kind of describing, but she said, look, we'll just try every Gingersnap ginger molasses recipe we can find, and maybe we'll get something approximated that is your dream cookie. So I knew she was on this quest, and I found this book when I was over looking at cookbooks. I was probably just in Barnes and Noble or something one afternoon, and it looked like a winner, but it had a Gingersnap recipe in it. So I grabbed it for her, thinking she might want to do those ginger snaps. There's more to this story. Get ready. So I get home with this cookbook, and I start looking at it, and I never sent it to her. I never gave it to her. But don't worry about it, because what happens is I'm like, you're going to keep this book. This book is fantastic. So just keep it and send her one. All will be well. So that's what I did. I kept it. I sent her a copy. All is good. And then about a year ago, she says to me, I'm looking for a recipe for, and she mentioned some cookie. I don't remember what now. I can't find the ginger snaps in here. We'll find them. I'm looking for a recipe for some cookie. And I said, well, did you check with Carole Walter, Great Cookies? And she says, what's that? And I'm like, no. That killer, amazing cookie cookbook that I gave you, our favorite cookie cookbook. She had no idea what I was talking about. Do you know, I guess I never got her a copy and sent it to her. I bought her this gift. I kept it. I cooked out of it for, the next 17 years and never gave her a copy. So we corrected that immediately. I got on Amazon, ordered her a copy, and got it sent out to her. And she has been baking out of it, and she loves it. But you know what's funny is she told me that she almost considers this like cookie baking 102, and where she was 20 years ago was kind of 101. That she's actually glad she had some time to get a little bit more comfortable in the kitchen and a little bit more comfortable with some of these baking techniques before she jumped into this one. Personally, I think that Carole Walter has done an incredible job of laying out a cookie cookbook for you that is beginner friendly, but if you are an advanced baker, it is not too simple. You're going to find great tips and techniques, and her formulas are flawless. I think one of the big frustrations we have with recipes that we find, especially now with the internet so prevalent in how we're finding our recipes, you Google cookie and up comes a recipe. There's no vetting it, is there? How do you know if the recipe is of any value? Is the chef who wrote it, did they really do a lot of research? Did they really practice it? Did they really test it? Throughout Cookbook Corner, I will always share with you the cookbooks that are my favorite. And one of the things that makes them my favorite is they're trusted. If I do a recipe out of them, they'll work. The thing about Carole Walter's Great Cookies, she did the work. These formulas, if you follow them, are on the money. You just don't need to change anything. But I've also had great success with doubling and tripling recipes out of this book, which is really cool too, because sometimes baking math can go a little wonky when you start doubling and tripling. And I have always had great success with doubling and tripling recipes of hers. So Great Cookies. Let's get into what's in here and talk about it a little bit. First of all, the opening of it, I'll show you this opening page. I flagged a bunch of pages, but here's your contents. And so she's broken these cookies down into bars and refrigerator and all kinds of different categories. So lots of different categories of cookies. I think that's really cool. Cold cuts. So you refrigerate them and slice them. Pipe and press, hand formed, jumbo cookies, big boys. I think that's pretty cool because it just gives you some place to go right away. A lot of times, for me anyway, when I'm baking, I'm often baking with the idea of sharing. Maybe I'm intentionally baking them as a gift, or I'm baking them to take someplace, like it's an event, I'm going to go to a party or something like that. Here's ginger snaps right at the beginning. So, and you'll see mine's kind of gross. The photo's gross. It's got stains all over it, but it's because I use it so much. So there's her ginger snaps. And when I originally bought this for my mom and then stole it from her without her knowing it and kept it for 20 years, the thing that I liked about the crispy ginger snap recipe in this one is that it actually doesn't call for molasses. And because what she and Steve were working out was trying to find this right texture, I thought just eliminating the molasses might be an interesting thing for them to try. And Carole Walter does say in here that she's got, this is power packed with ginger flavor. But unlike most ginger snaps, these are made without molasses, which makes them extra crispy. And, you know, I have to tell you that of all the baking supplies that just sort of hang out in my pantry, molasses is one that can often be missing, right? So if you just get a wild hair, declare it fake fall, decide that you're going to bake cookies all day and light pumpkin spice candles, do you have molasses on hand? The answer for me more often than not is no. But everything else she puts in here are pantry staples for me. But the other thing she does, I'm not going to hold this page up because it's the complete recipe, but in the bottom left corner of each of these recipes, she gives you the cookies characteristics. So cookie characteristics for these crispy ginger snaps. I don't have my glasses on, you guys. They are home style, they have a long shelf life, and they travel well. So home style, homey, comforting. These are not fancy cookies. I love that. I love that she gives that a definition because on Fake Fall Monday, I want home style cookies. It's fake fall. Long shelf life. That's important for me in Florida. I need to know that. And they travel well. I just told you that if I bake cookies, it's generally to take to a party or to book club night. My book clubbers are all saying that's nonsense. Andrea, you never bake us cookies. Well, I did today, y'all. So, but they travel well. I'm actually giving some of these cookies to a friend of ours for his birthday tomorrow. So characteristics, that's pretty cool, right? And she does that for every cookie. I think that's really handy. Some other things I want to show you in this book are, look, you want to talk about a page that is junked up. So let me see. I'm going to do this and hide the recipe. But look. Do you see all the splatters on that page? And then you see all my math off to the side? That's because I am forever multiplying these recipes, just doing tons of them. This is for her favorite lemon squares, which clearly are also my favorite lemon squares. Let's get that recipe out of there. So it's a shortbread, it's a short dough cookie bottom with lemon curd, and then you bake it and it sets and you hit it with powdered sugar. Lemon desserts, right? Golly. Anyway, those are fantastic. You can freeze these. Did you know you could freeze lemon squares? So that's cool to know too. See, that's in part why all the math over here, when I figure out that you can freeze something, then I'll take the time to make it times 3. Do a ton of them and then you have them on hand. Biscotti. Look at this photo of these biscotti in this paper cup there. Aren't those beautiful? Aren't they gorgeous? So biscotti, I've done a lot of her biscotti recipes in part because biscotti are a nice thing to give at Christmas or holidays because they do store well and they do travel well, and whomever you give them to, they can keep them, in an airtight container throughout the month. But you know what else I like about giving biscotti is that they're easy to package. They aren't fragile, and so you can stack several together in like a clear plastic cellophane gift bag type thing, or layer them up in a tin. What worries me about gifting cookies that are flat is that they start snapping if you stack them up on each other. So biscotti package up really well as gifts too. That's probably why I do a lot of those, but they're also delicious. I love biscotti with a cup of tea, and I like my biscotti really crispy. Do you too? So my second bake, biscotti are twice baked. So you make a loaf, par bake it, slice it into the biscotti, set those on their sides, and bake them again. That second bake, I don't do super thin biscotti, although I do like those, but I don't want them too thick either. That's such a Goldilocks statement, isn't it? Somewhere right in between, but I bake them pretty dry because I like to eat them with tea and you can dunk them. Okay, here's a page that has no markings on it. You can see it looks like I bought the book yesterday. And that is because this recipe is for meringue. And I live in the tropics. So meringues are a terrible idea here. There are probably 30 days out of the entire calendar year that our humidity level disappears in a way that makes making meringue an option. And the problem with it is you're just never going to know. You're never going to know. If you set up to make meringues some fun, crisp fall, real fall, not fake fall. So let's say November 20th afternoon. Here's what I promise you. When you wake up that morning, it's going to be raining sideways. And the humidity will have gone right back through the roof. Meringue don't do well here. So if you live someplace cool and dry, make her beautiful meringue. She has so many pretty ones. She flavors them with cocoa powder. So there's chocolate meringue. And I do like meringue, but it's just not really a good idea here. Great Cookies by Carole Walter. So as I mentioned in another cookbook corner, we talked about Nick Malgieri. And I showed you in his book kind of a rating that I do from, I put an E for something that's excellent. It means I just didn't even adjust anything. VG, very good. If I just made a little tweak here or there. I always write notes to myself if I felt like shaping or rolling them out needed a little bit of reminder the next time I do it. And I mentioned in the Nick Malgieri cookbook corner that I always want you to read the introduction by the chef when you buy a cookbook. First of all, I like reading cookbooks. Do you? I mean, I just enjoy a little bit of the history of the author, maybe their culinary background. Did they work in bakeries? Did they work in restaurants? Are they just home cooks that, just took it to the next level? But read the introduction in these baking books, because again, that's where these chefs will give you some really key info sometimes, like how they measure flour, or if they're using salted or unsalted butter, if it's not specified in the recipe. So let's talk about a couple things about the recipes themselves that are just general things to keep in mind when baking anyway. And Q&A with Chef A, which is our podcast that you can find on Gumroad, that is where I actually deep dive into culinary questions and answer some questions about the science behind some of these things. But I'm going to throw you a couple thoughts about cookie baking today. So one thing is the consistency of your butter. When a recipe in a cookbook calls for room temperature butter, they mean it. And what they mean by that generally is butter that's been sitting out of the refrigerator for about 5 to 8 hours. Overnight is even better. Room temp is exactly what it sounds like. It's room temp. And you can't fake that. You're not going to be able to take cold butter and microwave it to try to approximate room temperature butter. What you're going to have out of the microwave is partially melted and partially cold butter, or completely melted. And melted butter is not room temperature butter. I do have a Q&A podcast on butter. It's several different segments, and we go into a lot of detail about the consistency of. But when you're messing with one of these cookbooks and they tell you what consistency they want that butter, that's not for, you can't play with that, is what I'm here to say. So if it calls for room temperature butter, get your butter out before you go to bed. If you're going to bake on a Saturday morning, pull that butter out on Friday night before you go to bed. It's going to be fine sitting on the kitchen counter. All will be well, even in Florida. Trust me. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to mention is in this particular recipe that I did today, which is her Gingersnap recipe, she calls for baking soda, and she also calls for a teaspoon of cider vinegar. That teaspoon of cider vinegar, I see that in a printed recipe, and I know from so many of my home cooks coming through all of these years and their confessions of home cooking adjustments that they like to make. I could see some of my home cooks saying, do I really need it? I mean, I don't want vinegar in my ginger snaps, and I don't have cider vinegar, so can't I just make these cookies without it? The short answer is no. And here's the story behind that. When you're looking at a recipe and it's calling for baking soda versus baking powder, and baking soda is Arm & Hammer. That's what we use. Y'all, look at this box of baking soda. Don't laugh at me now. Remember, I work in a big kitchen. Your baking soda is probably this big. Not this big. Baking soda is the yellow box, and the brand we use here most often is Arm & Hammer. It's got the arm on it. And then there's baking powder. Oops, baking powder. So these are not interchangeable either, by the way. So just so you know there. I'll do a Q&A with Chef A on biscuit baking at home because it warrants a couple of podcasts. There's a lot of information in the world of biscuits and dumplings, and I kind of consider them the same category. And I'll go into more detail there, but the short answer is baking soda and baking powder are not interchangeable. And when you see a recipe that calls for baking soda, it's always also going to call for some acidic liquid somewhere. In the case of biscuits, often what you'll see is that if it calls for baking soda, it calls for buttermilk. Buttermilk has a high enough acid level to be considered acidic. Other acidic liquids, lemon juice, vinegar, there are a few acidic liquids available to us in our kitchen. So the cider vinegar, the reason I understood that it was important in this recipe is because I can look at her ingredients and see that rather than baking powder, she's calling for baking soda. And baking soda always requires an acid in the liquid to activate it. And activating it is what makes your cookies both puff and spread. Baking powder, they've actually added powdered acid to baking soda. So they've taken regular baking soda and they've added powdered acid in some form. Could be powdered citric acid, ascorbic acid, something like that. The only thing that you need to activate baking powder is liquid of any kind. And you could find on the internet ways to substitute baking soda and baking powder, but it's not clean math. And what I mean is if it calls for a teaspoon of baking soda, do I use a half a teaspoon of baking powder? I wish. It's not even anywhere near that. It's wonky math. You can look it up. Best thing to do is have both on hand and don't question the recipe when it calls for that little bit of acid. And it's such a small amount. It's only a teaspoon. Are you sure that it matters? It does if you want the right consistency. So now let's take a look at the cookies. Do you know I baked these cookies? They've been out of the oven for about 2 hours and I have not eaten one, not even one bite of one because I was waiting for you guys. All right, let's take a look at these cookies. So here's what I want you to know about these cookies. Let's take a look at the texture. Look at the crackle on the top of it, that crackly, splitty thing. Isn't that amazing? And I did these on parchment paper. And they have a nice gold bottom. Now, one thing I would do with this recipe and have done with this recipe is, I'm putting these by my coffee because I'm going to eat them in a minute. One thing I've done with this recipe in the past is take a little bit of really coarse sugar, like the kind of sugar that's on the cover. See how she did those cookies? See how coarse that grain is of sugar? Or turbinado sugar. So it's the brand is Sugar in the Raw, turbinado sugar. And a little sprinkle of that right on top of the little ball of dough. When they spread, it'll grab that sugar and kind of pull it across the top. The only reason I didn't do it is because I didn't have any here today. So, and I was worried about granulated sugar, like super fine, regular granulated sugar. I didn't want that to burn while they baked, so I didn't bother with that. But if I have that nice coarse grain sugar, I'll use that. But I love this crackly texture. And if you're not getting the appearance on cookies that you're intending to get, there are typically three spots where you might be failing. One of the easiest is your oven temperature. I always share this in my cooking classes here. We're big proponents of you buying an oven thermometer. They're $6 or so, and you just hang it in your oven and set your oven on 350 degrees. And when the preheat alarm or light goes off or on, however your oven works, peek in there and see what temperature it is. The first thing I want you to know is your oven preheating the way that it says that it is? Because sometimes they're not. It can take them far longer if they're older ovens. Sometimes they're not calibrated and they're getting hotter. But for now, just see, is it at 350 when it says that it is? Because if it's not, and you put your cookie dough in to an oven that's say only at 317 or 318 and it's still working its way up to 350, you could have some fails in texture there. What will happen is they'll start to melt. The butter could start to separate from them before they actually set as a cookie. The next thing I want you to check with your oven thermometer is when you're sure that you feel like the oven is completely preheated, so it's been on for 45 minutes. Then look at it again. And what temperature are you getting in the very center of the oven? You can hang the oven thermometer. If this is a box, you can hang it right in the center. And so where are you getting ambient temp? What are you getting? At 350, are you getting 375? You need to know that. I don't need you to call out a technician and recalibrate your oven, but just be smarter than your oven. If your oven is running 25 degrees hot, you know that and accommodate for it. Likewise, if the oven is running 25 degrees cool. So if it's never getting past 325 when it's been set to 350, you need to know that. You're going to have to compensate for that and turn the heat up more. Cooking at too low of a temperature, especially for something as delicate as cookies that have all that butter in there, can really change the consistency and ultimately lead to a fail. What else was I going to tell you about oven temp? Really, that's basically it. So, but the other thing about the consistency of your cookies, baking soda, baking powder, they're not interchangeable, and the texture of the butter that's called for. If it calls for room temp, it's not kidding. Likewise, if it calls for cold, like really cold butter, it means it. It means you got to go to the refrigerator and take out very cold butter. It's going to make a big difference to the texture. But that crackly top, oh my gosh. You know, homemade ginger snaps, the thing is, not only is it so gingery, which I think the ones we buy at the store, I think ginger is one of those spices that just fades with time. You know what I mean? So once it's packaged up and in a bag, I think we lose that spiciness because it's really in there. But I can taste the butter. That's what's missing to me from store-bought cookies for sure. I can never taste butter. I can taste the butter in that cookie, and it is delicious. I wanted to look at the bottoms of these though. So this is one that I did on, you can see it's still just as spread and crispy, but the bottom, see that shine compared to the one I just took a bite of? So I did this one on a Silpat baking sheet. I mean, a Silpat liner on the baking sheet. And if good cookie bottoms are something you're struggling with, and I know some home cooks are, I know that's a thing. If getting the right bottom on the cookie is a problem for you, you might want to try investing in a Silpat and see how it does. A Silpat is a silicone baking sheet, and they make them so that they're the size of a half cookie sheet. So you just set it right in there. It's not my favorite tool, and I'm going to tell you why. I feel like they're a pain to wash. They're flippity floppity, and they're hard to find a place to set out to dry. And typically my baking is pretty high heat baking. Remember, I do a lot more bread baking than I do cookie baking. So my oven is usually between 425 and 450, and that's too hot for most Silpats. They're meant to do low heat baking, like 325 to 375. It's just not what I do a lot of. So it's not a tool that's a multitasker for me. You know what I mean? It's this sheet of material that comes out at the beginning of December for a few days while I do batches of cookies. I don't know. What I typically use to line my baking sheets is parchment paper, and parchment paper doesn't have any effect on the bake. It's not a part of the ingredients or anything. It just makes cleanup super easy. And if you're doing multiple batches of cookies, you can turn your parchment over and use the back side of it for the next round. So that's what I use. But the Silpat, I did give that sort of gloss to the bottom. And they're definitely non-stick, so you don't need to add anything, a little bit of vegetable oil or anything like that to the pan if you're using Silpat, generally speaking. So there's that information. Carole Walter, great cookies. It's the most aptly named cookbook in the history of cookbooks. It looks simple. It's one of the best cookie collections I've ever used in my life, and I've been using it for a long time. It's my go-to for cookies that I want to gift because I know they're going to be delicious and beautiful. Oh, I'll also mention she tells you in the Gingersnap recipe to add chopped candied ginger. Well, here's the thing. Here's why there's none at the studio, because I eat it. So I love candied ginger, and I do keep a jar of it that I buy on the baking aisle. But I like a couple pieces of candied ginger after dinner. So I have like a little ceramic bowl, and I just throw a couple pieces in, and I just nosh on them while we're watching whatever show we're watching, while I'm knitting myself a new fake fall sweater. Knit, candied ginger. I just like eating it. And so my candied ginger's at home today. It's not here at the studio. But otherwise, I would have definitely chopped some of that and put it in there. If you have got a hold of some winter spices that you're just wanting to use up because you need to refresh them this year for all your holiday baking, this is a great recipe for it. I upped the ground cloves in it. I added some ground nutmeg to mine. I upped the amount of ginger because I didn't have the candied ginger. So those sort of things, like the spice content, that's pretty flexible. She called for a little cinnamon in it. I'm not really getting that in mine, but my cinnamon might be a little faded out at this point. You could up that a bit. Anyway, I think you could play with these spice-wise. And those warm baking spices, if you don't know what to do with them, if you join us for the Q&A with Chef A, all about curries, we've got some great opportunities to use up those leftover ginger, clove, nutmeg spices in some great savory curries. So that's a thought for you. All right, guys, great cookies. I hope I remembered everything in this, but honestly, we got to wrap it up because I need to eat this cookie is what needs to happen. It's fake fall in Florida, officially. I'm doing fall baking for real. And I hope you'll give this book a try. I found it for my mom when I bought it for her the second time on Amazon. But you could do a hunt around and see what you can find. But great cookies. Everything I've ever done out of it has been lovely. And it's really a fun one just to read and look through and get inspired. So Cookbook Corner, that's it for today. I hope you guys are having a beautiful, crisp fall day wherever you are. I hope that you make some delicious cookies and make the house smell fantastic. And I hope you're having a delicious day. We'll catch you next time.